Happy New Year, everybody. Ed Carvajal here for MMAnews.com. This is your first Sunday submission of the new year in 2022. Today is January 2nd. And as I said, this is Sunday submission. You're probably catching this over at the MMAnews.com YouTube channel, but I also stream this live on my own Twitter account at Carbazel. That's my Twitter handle. Make sure you give me a follow there because this is the first one on. Might be the last one of the year. I'm not sure yet. I'm gonna find out this week, but I do enjoy doing it, so I'll probably keep doing some sort of weekend recap thing, depending on what they decide to do. But I know we're in a bit of a lull, but we do have some interviews up on the YouTube channel. So if you do like the content we're putting out here, make sure you do the bell notification, thumbs up, subscribe, and all that. We have the interviews done by the Canadian God James Lynch with Alexander Rackets. I always mispronounce his name. I'm sorry. He's got a fight coming up in March. And Lynch got to speak with him about that. So make sure you're following along for all of that. And if, as always, MMAnews.com has your heavy UFC related content, but there isn't none. We haven't had any UFC. There isn't none. We haven't had any UFC, and we're not going to have some. When do they come back? The 13th, I think. So we got like 2 weeks before the UFC starts putting on shows again every goddamn weekend and flooding your timeline. And I don't mean that in a bad way because I obviously I watch and enjoy it just as much as you guys. But there is stuff going on in mixed martial arts and the combat sports world. After all, the website is called MMA News, not UFC News. But I digress. There was. If you've been following the sport of mixed martial arts, you know that Ryzen. Did anyone ever drop the comment? And I've checked on how to correctly pronounce whatever the Risen Fighting Federation in Japan. They did their annual New Year's Eve event, and then on Fight Pass, if you're a Fight Pass subscriber like myself, Cage Fury Fighting Championships in 2021 started their own submission-only grappling promotion, and they use kind of like the advantage rules similar to Fight to Win uses, and they held their third event of the year because they only just started it, and it was on Fight Pass, and it actually featured a lot of competitors from the UFC roster, obviously looking to stay busy, make some money. You know, they got to wear whatever they wanted to wear with a lot of sponsorship logos on them, so it's a good thing for them. And it seemed to be trending on Thursday night when it happened. So that was the day before New Year's Eve on Thursday night. And we're going to talk about that because they did something with the rules when it came to the regards of UFC fighters. And it kind of made me think about, we have this whole boxer versus MMA thing, but what about a MMA guy versus jiu-jitsu guy? If you look at the history of the sport, there is a correlation between submission grappling and the birth of mixed martial arts. Got some tea in my cup this afternoon. And we're going to talk about that before we get into all the BS news floating around social media. We'll talk about that first, actually, just to get it out of the goddamn way. So, of course, it's up on MMAnews.com. You see, it's the one that's first up there on the page with Jake Paul and Dana White accusing one another of dodging or whatever. They're going back and forth on social media. Seems to be on everybody's news site. Listen, no negotiations don't get done on social media. I think we both know that. This is just, the UFC is on their break. Jake Paul's on his break. I think they're just having some fun keeping their name and relevancy up, and and that counts, in the long run for marketing and all that stuff like that. So they're both playing the game because it's both, at the end of the day, if you're paying attention to it, it's good for business, right? So that's why we're seeing all that. You're not going to see, I don't think anyone's going to sign any legally binding contracts for the steroid testing or the cocaine testing or whatever the hell these two want to do. And I'm more aggravated that this is news than with them. You know what I mean? Like, let them bicker back and forth. I mean, everybody's just grabbing these because there's no fights. There's fights going on, but there's no UFC going on. And if that's where you heavily like to draw your content from, then that's what you're going to talk about, right? Anyway, this is glare on my nose. I'm not that shiny. There, that takes care of that a little bit. um, so, um, you know, if you're looking at both sides of it, of course, Jake Paul brings up the payment disparity that everyone seems to talk about in the UFC and things like that. And I personally, I'm just, we know about it. The sport, as big as the UFC is right now, it's still growing. It's only like 30 years old or whatever, however old it is. So, I think by the time I'm an old man, maybe we'll see the Ali Act expand over to mixed martial arts. Maybe we won't, but and there's former fighters that are liking what Jake Paul. I saw Tim Sylvia credit Jake Paul. If you don't know about Tim Sylvia, he was a former UFC champion. He had his arm broken in the UFC at a fight, and he had the rod put in with screws, and then maybe it was like 2 years ago. I forget how long. They started coming out, and obviously he doesn't fight anymore. He's retired. He's doing his own thing. I think he's got like a hunting show or something on Versus or YouTube channel or something like that. But he needed to have that taken care of. So the UFC wouldn't take care of it because he's no longer, he's a fighter. So, I mean, to quote Tim Sylvia's tweet, which is on social media, where he's thanking Jake Paul for kind of standing up for guys like him. He said that the UFC said they wouldn't take care of it because it didn't happen on their time or whatever, which is messed up. I mean, when you think about the life and limb and their bodily harm that all these fighters put on, they're doing it for their own personal glory and stuff like that. Yes, to make some money, but for us, it's just entertainment. I feel like that's one of the things that a lot of folks seem to miss when the sport gets bigger. You start getting a lot of the armchair fans that can feel like you can treat it the same as baseball or basketball or something like that, and it's not cool when it comes to combat sports. This goes back to the whole Stephen A. Joe Rogan thing when Stephen A. was coming down on Donald Cerrone after he lost to McGregor. He talked about how there's a reverence when it comes to this because, I mean, this is just controlled violence, controlled, man versus man battle, or man versus woman battle. So it's not something to really scoff at or try to, you can critique stuff and say your opinions, but you still should do it with some sort of respect, I think, anyway. And that's where I agree with Rogan. I mean, I don't think it. I mean, if you're here watching this and reading MMAnews.com, you're probably, or you might be a fan of Stephen A. Smith. Who knows? We'd definitely grab content about him if it comes up for MMA on this website. So, so in that sense, it's like, yeah, I mean, Jake Paul, every time he goes back and forth with Dana White, he brings up a lot of good points. But then on the other side of it, Dana White seems to be getting tired of him just using his name to get attention and stuff like that. So, for all the folks that disagree with the way he pays the fighters and does business, there's still folks fighting to get to the UFC, and you know what I mean. So it's almost so balanced both sides that we're never going to see a clear who's right and who's wrong. I think unless the Ali Act expands into mixed martial arts. But if that happens, I mean, are we going to see the same matchmaking processes that happen in boxing and in mixed martial art? Do we really want to see that? I mean, even Teddy Atlas just had Dana White on his podcast and was kind of commending him because we see more of the fights we want to see in the UFC and in mixed martial arts, as opposed to getting the boxing matches we want to see that don't get derailed by all the other stuff going on. So it's a long road to travel, but it's definitely you can get set into following the sport and cheering and following all it, but oddly enough, it takes a guy like Jake Paul to bring it up. So I don't hate it. Obviously, it's on the radar of everyone. That's why it's the number one read thing on MMAnews.com. So folks are paying attention, and not for nothing. I mean, Jake Paul seems to be gifted at pushing buttons and getting eyeballs on him, and it seems like he's becoming a pretty good boxer too. I mean, considering he beat two former UFC champion or two former MMA champions, Tyron Woodley UFC, Ben Askren won Bellator. So anyway, we'll leave that where it is. As far as having nothing to watch, the Fury Pro Grappling event. One thing that came out days before was the rule set that they used for this Fury Pro Grappling event. Shout out to Nolan King for putting it up on social media over at MMA Junkie. He put up the rules, and the thing was, so you did have grapplers versus MMA fighters, and then you had a couple of MMA fighters just grappling each other. But the main event was initially supposed to be Danielle Kelly versus Rose Namajunas, who's the current strawweight champion in the UFC. COVID protocols changed that, so Rose was out, and then the woman that she's supposed to be facing in this year, Carla Esparza, steps in to face, because they're walk around sort of the similar weight. I would assume Rose and her, because they're the weight class they're in. Short notice to face Danielle Kelly in a submission only grappling match. So, if you don't know, Danielle Kelly won by doctor stoppage. Oddly enough, Carla Esparza took her down, got her on the mat, was in her guard, having trouble getting out of her guard. Danielle Kelly went for a Ezekiel, folks, that the Nogi Ezekiel around the head here, and was almost made it tight, and that threatened Esparza. So that kind of woke her up. So she did something. I don't know if she did it to get out of the guard, because she felt like she obviously her wrestling background versus Kelly's jiu-jitsu background, there's more threats off the back from Kelly versus controlling the match and winning by advantage point. So for folks that don't know, which I know MMAnews.com is probably doesn't have a big jiu-jitsu following. So like Fight to Win Pro, the advantage point style of submission only, there's no points, rather there's a judging criteria. So there's judges watching, and a submission only. So you can either win by submission, and if it goes to the distance, they don't go into overtime like in combat jiu-jitsu or EBI rules, submission on the ground. The judges make a decision on who won based on control or what have you. If nobody gets a submission. However, in the main event, Carla Esparza, and if you haven't seen it, it's all over social media. She picked up and slammed Kelly to try to get her to open her guard, and then her guard she didn't open her guard, but because of the impact, it's funny because a similar thing happened with it wasn't as mean as Quentin Rampage did to Ricardo Arona back in Pride, talking about New Year's Eve in Japan and MMA, all that. It wasn't that bad. She was just enough to try to get her to open a guard, but it was enough impact for when she slammed her, Kelly's head went up and banged Esparza right in the eye, which caused the cut. So surely that's going to delay any matchup between her and Namajunas in this year. I don't know if they announced the date for it. I know Dana White said that's happening. I don't remember if he said when that's happening, but it's probably not going to happen for a little while now, because that cut has to heal. It was a pretty significant cut, and Kelly got a little mouse right here on her forehead from it too. So it's just because of where they clashed. Unfortunately. So the rule set that they did for this event, that match was an MMA fighter versus a jiu-jitsu person, right? And of course, yes, there are MMA fighters with jiu-jitsu backgrounds, the Damian Mayas, the Gilbert Burns, Ryan Halls of if you're looking at the UFC roster. It's the rule was any competitor that was on the UFC roster could not have heel hooks done on them. Only straight ankle lock, straight knee bar was allowed. as far as allowable submissions on those competitors, and with good reason. Reaping of the knee and any heel, anything that twists up your leg, in that type of in the live grappling format that they do, can cause some serious damage. And if you don't know, just ask anybody that does it, or look up some nasty heel hooks and stuff like that. Which by the time the folks tap, it's usually because something snapped or broke, or some tendon popped loose, or what have you. So it's not safe. And obviously UFC fighters that make their money fighting for the UFC can't risk injury like that. So I thought the rule set was welcome. I know a lot of folks, oddly enough, one of the ones that didn't like it was Billy Quarantillo, who's on the UFC roster, and he went against Clay Guida. So that was like a MMA fighter versus MMA fighter. But it's the old school, like IBJJF format, like, because those used to not be allowed. I think they just added them back like a year or so ago. But either way, like, when you look at the history of the sport, that wasn't something too popular. And if you look at submission grappling and jiu-jitsu, like, and the self-defense aspects of it, it works very well into mixed martial arts. And then when you get into sport jiu-jitsu, that's where those heel hooks and going inverted and upside down and stuff like that, which is not advisable in a self-defense situation, or fighting. Just if you want to see a good example of why, check out Sage Northcutt versus Nikki Gall. Nikki Gall goes inverted on him, and he finds out real quick why not to do that. Even though he won that fight, but he gets a really bad lump or cut on his head because he went inverted, and Sage Northcutt just popped him right in the head. So I thought that the rule set worked, only because, I mean, it's oddly enough, as much as jiu-jitsu people used to hate it, the no heel hooks and rules, reaping of the knee moves, it worked pretty well, because it seemed really fair, almost more fair than what Triad Combat tried to do, which is why I wanted to talk about it. Because when we looked at Triad Combat's new rule set for whatever they're trying to do there, which, by the way, a new event is coming from them, according to them, at the end of February. So we haven't seen the last of Triad Combat. But I'm gonna take this down because there's no Fury Pro stuff on here. But the rules for this seem to work better than whatever Triad Combat's trying to do, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at the results, again, I mean, that was an injury stoppage with Daniel Kelly versus Carla Esparza. But Sean Brady beat Craig Jones. So if you're not familiar, again, with the grappling world, Craig Jones is a really good jiu-jitsu competitor from the world of submission grappling. But a lot of his game is leg locks and the heel hooks and stuff like that. Sean Brady fights in the UFC. And he beat one of the best guys in jiu-jitsu in a jiu-jitsu match. Craig Jones seemed to have some sour grapes about it, but his game was negated, sort of. I mean, the argument was that none of them really went anywhere, right? But if Brady's on top and controlling, he didn't really get past his guard. But because of the top position, this happens in MMA too. Judges usually score for the guy on top, right? Even when the guy's on bottom is attacking. If those attacks aren't successful, then the guy on top wins. So this was kind of similar to that. Not that Craig Jones wasn't attacking, but I mean, if you listen to Paul Felder's commentary, who was Matt's side for this one, he kind of said, like, Sean Brady's a lot stronger than he looks, and it looks like Craig Jones couldn't get anything off. And yeah, Brady couldn't pass his guard or anything like that, but this is again, no points here. It's advantage, or right, advantage only. And then we had another one. So that's an MMA fighter that beat a jiu-jitsu guy. But then you had jiu-jitsu people that picked up wins against MMA fighters. Nikki Rodriguez, another guy from the same, like, Danaher lineage of the Danaher Death Squad, Renzo Gracie folks, another top-level submission grappling competitor. He defeated a heavyweight over from Bellator, Steve Mowry, who was on this card, via submission. So he submitted him. And if you've seen Steve Mowry fight, for a big guy, he's actually got some pretty good jiu-jitsu on the ground in mixed martial arts. You'd have to check out. I know we're not, we do some Bellator content on here, but check out, if you have Pluto TV, you can watch. They have a Bellator channel. You can watch all the Bellator events and see if you can find some Steve Mowry matches on there. But he's no slouch on the ground either. So that was to me enough of the MMA fight. And then Gillian Robinson got a win. She was the first one on the Fury Pro. The first match they had, that was on YouTube, so you can actually watch the first 3 ones. They're on YouTube if you want to see what this was like. If you don't have a Fight Pass account, I believe it was under the Cage Fury YouTube channel, or no, I'm sorry, UFC.com had it too. But CFFC, Cage Fury Fighting Championships, Fury Pro is their pro grappling event. And I honestly think that this might be something, I mean, of all the grappling events, I think this is something, and again, it's very similar to Fight to Win. So it would suck if they stole their thunder. But I mean, the UFC Fight Pass features a lot of like grappling stuff, and they have a decent amount of traffic and following. And this, just to get under Cage Fury Fighting Championships, banner of events, because they have their CFFC MMA events, and now they have this. And some oftentimes they'll do them, Friday, Saturday, or Thursday, Friday, 2 nights in a row, with MMA Junkies John Morgan usually doing commentary along with CM Punk from Pro Wrestling over at AEW. So it was doing pretty well as far as trending on social media too. Mainly Twitter, which is why you say I share my Twitter account, because I mean, with all sports, I mean, tweets seem to be the fastest thing to do interaction with any sport, versus Instagram. And I mean, I don't know what goes on Facebook anymore, but yeah, it was definitely something that I think having 3 events and the third one doing something like this, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more. I'd like to see Sean O'Malley on one of these. Only because I remember when he did the Quinten Older, didn't he do one? I mean, he might have been on the second one. Now I'm thinking about it, but either way, because I know like Chase Hooper was on this one against Renato Moicano. Again, 2 MMA fighters that grappled each other, and Moicano actually won. And people talk about Hooper's jiu-jitsu in fights, but Moicano won by decision. So, I'm going over it because, like, when we talk about trying to find something that evens a playing field, when you talk about this whole thing with Jake Paul and Dana White and boxers, MMA fighters going into boxing with the boxing rule set and triad combat and stuff like that, it's hard to find something that complements both athletes completely. And what they did at Fury Pro Grappling 3, to me, seemed like to be one of the few very successful things that helped, that was even the playing field for both jiu-jitsu competitors and mixed martial arts competitors. Even ones with very good, like Quarantillo has some very good jiu-jitsu, and he lost the decision to Clay Guida, who even at the end of it, when they spoke to him, talked about how wrestling saved his life, and just how great wrestling's been to him, and he was able to use his wrestling to nullify the submission attempts and just control the ground to win it. So we don't get a lot of like situations where you can agree, and maybe you don't agree. But I definitely, I mean, and again, I'm biased too, because as somebody that trains in jiu-jitsu, I thought this was definitely something that I could see taken off for both, another avenue for competition for fighters, MMA fighters, and for jiu-jitsu folks to kind of get their name out there, because now more folks know who Daniel Kelly is, Nikki Rod and Craig Jones. Now, just because I'm talking about Craig Jones on this platform because of this event. So, and if you don't know about CFFC, it's a Northeast regional promotion. They seem to be getting bigger and moving around a lot more. But they're generally, like, this was at the 2300 arena in Philly, where they mostly hold their events. They have a pretty good roster. One of their flyweights, actually, Fumi Nakuda. You don't be surprised if you see him in the UFC very soon. He's their current flyweight champion. He's calling out Brandon Moreno and Figueiredo and all those guys, and even offered himself up to be like a replacement if a COVID protocol or something, if they need to call him up to come in and step in last minute. He even offered himself up for that. So, and he's very entertaining, not just in the cage but outside of it too. So get yourself a Fight Pass account if you got some like Christmas money. I mean, not for nothing, they don't pay me, I don't make any money off of it, but I'm not gonna lie if I didn't say, especially during the beginning of the pandemic, if that wasn't probably where I got the most bang for my buck. Like any regional MMA event that was still able to go on went on there. They always show the pay-per-view UFC prelims there, the pre-prelims. I know you can get on ESPN Plus too, but I feel like you get more if you're a combat sports fan. They have boxing on there too, Roy Jones Jr. boxing. I think it's worth getting into, especially when you look at the growth of everything. And again, a lot of these fighters don't come out of the woodwork. The UFC just doesn't farm them at the UFC PI. They come through these regional promotions like CFFC. Aaron Jeffries, who fought on Contender Series twice, came out of this promotion. So I believe he's still the welterweight champion there, if I'm not mistaken. My apologies if I'm getting that wrong, but definitely worth checking out. So all that to say, for all you complain that there's nothing to watch because there's no UFC, there is something to watch. So there's always something to watch. I believe Invicta FC's next card, Invicta FC 45, which is the all-women mixed martial arts promotion, they're holding their next event on YouTube, so you have no excuse to miss it, on January 12th, which I believe is a Wednesday night. So it'll be good to get some midweek combat sports. It's a great card. It's a rematch between their flyweight champion and some ladies that I've interviewed for other outlets are on there. Monica Franco she faces Haley Cowan, who fought at LFA, who's another promotion that farms a lot of talent into the UFC. So don't feel like there is nothing to watch. There is plenty for you to watch, including this YouTube channel. So make sure, if you haven't already, once again, bell notification, thumbs up if you like what we're doing here, subscribe. Check out MMAnews.com for all your Jake Paul related nonsense and UFC heavy, who said this and that. And if you like what I do or you like my style, give me a follow on Twitter at Carbasil. That's my handle. Again, I always stream this live there, then it gets uploaded to the MMAnews.com YouTube channel. And as far as 2022 goes, man, I'm hoping we get to get back to some normalcy. Fights we get the fights we want to see. How do you feel about Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor? I see them going back and forth, or I see that coming up a lot on my social feeds. That's a fight I wouldn't mind. We actually did something on my podcast that I do with Matt Hawkins, our podcast, Coast to Coast Combat Hour, where we talked about fighters to watch and fights we'd like to see. And that's one fight we like to see, as far as, and then champions we like to see crowned. Kind of hoping talking about Conor McGregor, I'm hoping none of that Conor McGregor return messes with Justin Gaethje's shots at a 155-pound title. He seems to get the short end of the stick when it comes to things happening to him. I know he's a number one ranked guy, and we see him on pay-per-views and stuff, but like when I remember when the whole thing happened with the booking and rebooking of Ferguson and all the interviews he did, he talked about how he was kind of like left out of the loop, finding out through social media about news involving him. That's kind of messed up. But I'm just hoping, watching his career through World Series of Fighting and getting into the UFC and getting as far as he's got. I'd like to see him wear UFC gold, not interim gold, like actual UFC gold. And I know he would too. So hopefully nothing happens on the business end of things over there at the UFC. But hope you all had a happy and safe New Year. Good to be back. We took that little break for Christmas, but we may or may not be back to regularly Sunday scheduled programming, depending on what happens this week. If so, I might let you know on Sunday if you see me back here on Sunday. If not, again, make sure you give me a follow on Twitter. I'm going to put up my Twitter handle one more time just in case. But enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Again, 2022, let's kick its ass. Peace. I'm tapping out.